Welcome to Chat Communications Happenings and Trends. So recently, I guess last week, Ed Schultz did an interview with the National Review podcast about his termination from MSNBC. He used to be a co-host on that program, or I guess on that channel. He now actually does do journalism for Russia Today or RT. So he recently did an interview with Jamie Weinstein about his termination again. And so basically what he said was that because he was pro Bernie Sanders, he was unable to cover the, I guess, announcement for the presidential, that he was going to be running for the presidential bid or presidential nominee on the Democratic ticket. So they ended up kind of shelving that he had actually worked for. He had actually interviewed the senator, and they had told him actually not to, I guess, air that program. Instead, he was forced to cover other stories. They are other very important stories, such as the death of Freddie Gray, who again was, if you don't remember, he was an African-American that was shot and killed in Baltimore by the police. He also covered the Texas and Oklahoma floods during that time. And so basically, I guess something about 45 days after he was told not to cover Senator Sanders' story about running for president, his contract was terminated with the media giant. And he had a program, I guess the Ed Show is what it's called. And so that is no longer available. He was basically fired from the program. And so we wanted to kind of discuss this angle. He also mentioned a few other things in the podcast as well as kind of what his role is for Russia Today. So actually, there's a good amount of discussion that we want to cover with that. So I guess I'm just going to kick it off to you, Janet, to kind of get your initial thoughts on what he's stating about the firing and the termination. He also said that his somebody related to the station, I don't remember who you told me it was. It was Andy so-and-so. What's his name? Andy Lack, right? Was I don't know what his role was with the station, but apparently he was pretty much connected to the hip with the Clintons and the Clinton campaign, and actually may have contributed to Ed Schultz firing from MSNBC. So I just kind of wanted to get your perception on this, kind of what basically kind of summarize the allegations that we're seeing from Ed Schultz at this time, and basically what your take is.
Okay. Well, first, I wasn't really too much on Twitter at that point, but I was in Facebook, so I actually saw this kind of happen in real time and what people were thinking at the time, which is kind of exactly what Ed is saying now, which he couldn't have said back then. He basically was, he's stating that he was told not to cover Bernie, and I don't know if it sounded more like it wasn't just for that event. I mean, it was more like Ed Schultz was he liked Bernie, and he was, he was pro Bernie at the point. That's why he went down and he did the interview that day with him and had this whole thing planned out. But I think, they at the time they go and they say, oh, we're making these changes. We want a new MSNBC, and they went and they there was a couple of shows at that time that they canceled right around there. So basically it just comes down to almost a vindication on us, because we all kind of said, okay, Ed Schultz kind of got fired over the Bernie stuff, but everyone was telling us we were all nuts for saying that. But I mean, we, if you saw this happening online at the time, and I mean, I was a little bit on Twitter, but I wasn't as much in the politics at that time. So I did see a couple of tweets, but it was mostly on Facebook that I was seeing this stuff. And I guess the guy that he was saying was joined at the hip with the Clintons is Andy Lack. He was the news media head guy right at that point. And so he had a lot to say, and he's actually the guy too that a lot of the blame with what happened with Sam Cedar at the end of last year. He was the guy that jumped on this Cernovec thing, or at least is being touted as one of the guys that jumped on the Cernovec thing and ended up firing Sam Cedar and then having to go back and apologize to him too. And I guess there's a list.
So that was a time period where Mike Cernovich found an old tweet of Sam Cedars that was basically a joke, and Mike Cernovich took it out of context, in which I guess it ended up getting Sam Cedar fired. But once they kind of did an actual review of the situation, they found out that it was an absolutely 100% a joke. He did, and they had to subsequently rehire him. Isn't that exactly what kind of happened?
Yeah, they ended up in December having to apologize and rehiring Sam Cedar over this allegation.
So do you think this Andy guy, I mean, it sounds like he's very quick to jump on kind of any type of little perceived controversy whatsoever. Do you think that it was more of a no, he's connected to Clinton, that's why he ended up terminating, I guess, Ed Schultz? Or do you think it's well, Ed Schultz may be a little bit more controversial. He's too controversial. He's too progressive. We need kind of more moderate, more, kind of like what they were saying. They wanted to take MSNBC in another direction.
Well, I mean, take a look at how slow he acted on Matt Lauer, and then how quick he acted on Sam Cedar. I mean, if you look at the two things, both of them were out of the Me Too movement, and Matt Lauer's allegations were a hell of a lot worse. And right. He kind of hemmed and hawed about it's not like he jumped right on getting rid of Matt Lauer either. So I mean,
but Matt Lauer again isn't I would not boast him as a progressive, right? He's more very safe, moderate.
What I'm saying, you go from you have Sam Cedar who is a progressive, you have Ed Schultz who's a progressive, and it's it doesn't seem like there was any issues with getting rid of them, the progressives. And so I mean, you're asking me if I think is it because of the controversial, what they think is controversial? Yeah, that's exactly what I think, why it was so easy for them. And at the time, Ed Schultz's show was the highest rated show they had. And they tried to claim that he had low ratings, but he was the highest rated show for that time period, that time frame. What do you call it? Evening.
The time block.
Yeah, the time block. That's thank you.
So there's another article here, not just kind of describing the details of kind of what Ed Schultz talked about and I guess who he is now associated with and things like that. There's an article by the Daily Beast that came out that is, I have to say, kind of it's a poorly written article, to say the least. It's poorly written, low information attack. That's the way that I see it. Even if it's a legitimate criticism, maybe you always want to be careful with whomever your sources are coming from. That's why you be careful with MSNBC. You want to do it with every media outlet to understand what angle they're trying to do it with. But that being the case, they, instead of focusing on anything that Ed Schultz basically described as far as what MSNBC had done, his accusations against the company, they focused on a part of the podcast in which Jamie Weinstein basically asked his position about Russia Today as basically a propaganda outlet for Vladimir Putin, in addition to how he currently feels about Vladimir Putin. And he basically said, look, we do, they asked him about human rights violation, and he kind of did Trumpism, to where he kind of backed him, said like the United States also does these things. I think every major nation does these things, and as well as like, well, you were very hard on Vladimir Putin when you were on MSNBC. Why are you not so now? And I don't remember exactly what he said, but no, he said something to the effect of, well, I may have been a little bit extreme at the time when I was working for MSNBC, which I honestly don't know. I mean, this is the problem with media too. It's because you get so much information, you have so very little details. You aren't able to really make great decisions and understand exactly the whole piece in context. They did not add in this the accusations against the company that Ed Schultz was making against MSNBC. They just said, basically, I think the title was Ed Schultz tells Vladimir Putin and himself in bonkers interview. Bonkers interview. I mean, okay, where's the other part? Where he basically accused MSNBC of firing him for being progressive and pro-Bernie Sanders. Where's that portion of, it's not here, sorry. So they conveniently left that piece of information out. They made it seem like he was very, very pro-Vladimir Putin and things like that. Well, why can't we question the validity of our mainstream media in regards to Vladimir Putin? Because we do get propaganda. The mainstream media is the purveyor of said propaganda, and we are their consumers. And so I just wanted to kind of, Janet, get your take on this article, because it is so low information. It is so accusatory, and again, little details that I just can't with this. I just can't. Yeah.
It's I mean, basically, like that, I went looking for, okay, they have to be starting to come back at him with something. And of course it was the Daily Beast that did it. And
so Janet, can I stop you for a second and just kind of ask you, what is the Daily Beast's, what is their association with MSNBC? Do you know?
Well, Chelsea Clinton sits on the board of IAC. So, I mean, she sits on the board of the company that owns the Daily Beast. So, go figure.
I mean, I think it would be safe to say that even if there's not a direct connection between the two, these people know each other. These are the American oligarchs. And so they talk to each other. They have a particular agenda. Yeah. I know this sounds very conspiratorial, but I mean, the world over, right? This is how it works in a lot of other countries. I don't see why we would be excluded from that. I know that I'm saying that America isn't particularly special.
Yeah. There's a lot of contributors to both that they contribute to MSNBC and contribute to Daily Beast.
So I think it's kind of safe to say that they do have an agenda here. Clearly it is. I mean, I think that if they didn't, they would have put the entire thing in a certain context that would have made a lot more sense. I mean, you get like these sources, they're like, oh, we're not biased or anything like that. We are completely neutral. Well, there is a thing about not including information that introduces bias. This is what you can do with data. There's Janet, I don't know if I told you, but I'm going to be writing a piece for Actify about how to lie with data. And that's one of the biggest things you can do is not include information and just allow people to make their own conclusions, because, or you put in a certain framework and then hold information. It's a super easy because we want to fill in the gaps. Our brain naturally wants to do that. And so when we have things like this piece from the Daily Beast that just said, oh, he's a Vladimir Putin puppet, which I can fill in the gaps and make that assumption right here based off of the information that they provided me. But then it doesn't cause me to ask, well, wait, why is he all of a sudden the topic of interest right now? If I didn't know about the other side of it, would I have asked that? I would say that I probably wouldn't have, being a normal consumer of any information. Our lives are busy, so we don't have time to ask those questions, but we need to be, because why did he pop up now? He's been terminated from that station. He is, according to even the article, pretty irrelevant. So why are you talking about him? Why is he relevant now to you? But nobody's going to ask this. And that's why these things work. They are very effective. And so speaking to your point about vindication, right? You want to feel vindicated for the information that you received, because there was arguably media bias against Bernie Sanders. I mean, that's pretty clear. Little pieces are filling in those gaps that we keep getting out over time. But then they do these hit pieces on people, and that throws all that vindication, or potentially does, out the window, because people do like low information. It's very easy to digest, and they don't ask those questions like, what? Why is he all of a sudden in the media now?
And another thing I just want to add this is, you know, that whole piece you're saying is like poorly written. The only thing they cared about getting out is the title of that piece, because they know that 90% of people are only going to look at the title and not click it and read the whole thing. They're going to go, oh, well, Ed Schultz, if I see anything else about him, he's all in for Vladimir Putin. So he can't, all this other stuff. If he says other stuff, then that's going to be wrong.
It was literally like 2 paragraphs long. So yeah, they were not interested in getting any information out. You're right. It was more about that title.
So, but I mean, and then to the other point, like I don't know, you weren't on Twitter at the time in 2016 when there was literally one day that the Washington Post, within 24 hours, it ended up being 17 articles really, but they had the screenshot of the 16 because it was like just at the last minute they did a 17th hit piece on Bernie, and that's how the media was treating him at the time, and it was all those gotcha little titles. It was the titles, and then sometimes when you read the article with this horrific title, thinking, oh, you know, Bernie's such a bad guy, but then you read the article and it was totally not even making the point of the title. And so like this is what was happening, and this is what we were seeing through the entire primary. It was horrible. I mean, and then they just kept saying, oh, but no, here's one piece they did on Bernie, and we're like, okay, and here's 20 they did on Hillary. Like, what do you want from us?
You know, I think that it's very interesting that this just is emblematic of the sorry state of American media, right? American news media, which kind of, you know, I think Jon Stewart, when he was associated with The Daily Show, basically said at some point, you guys are doing such a poor job, you've given my program credibility. And I'm a comedian. That's how poor of a job you guys are doing. And so we need to be smarter, I guess. I think that this kind of ties into, I guess, the interview that we did with Beth Lynch. Watch it, by the way. It's awesome. Basically about kind of the problem with media and where to go, what we can do. Well, one of the things we can do is read the piece. Don't just look at the title, right? Read the piece. And then, Janet, like you said, you can see, well, is it even making its point? And then the next question we need to ask is, what information do we not have? And the subsequent question we can ask after that is, okay, why now? Why is this coming out now?
And so if you liked what you saw, make sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Also, please consider making a small donation to our Patreon so that we can continue bringing you content just like this. Thank you.